Megan, Dean Hickey, Terry Houston, and everybody for coming. This is a very interesting topic, climate change in the 2016 election. I should probably keep you in suspense, but I won't. I'll tell you my bias from the beginning. I believe that climate change is a profound challenge in the lifetimes of LaSalle College students and probably to their parents as well. It is a challenge to both their prosperity and their well-being. The foremost climate scientist of our time, Dr. James Hansen, said that we are now in danger of handing young people a situation that is out of our control. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy said that if we want to safeguard the health of future generations, we have to address climate change. The World Meteorological Organization said that we need to curb greenhouse gases now before we pass the point of no return. Therefore, I will vote for the Democratic candidate for president. But your views are important also. I'm going to talk for 35 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have a chance to share our views on this subject, and also you could ask me questions. This is what I'll be talking about. I'll be talking about the context of climate change, President Obama's record, the prominence of climate change in this election, the candidates' positions, the climate change. The climate change should really not be a partisan issue, and maybe it won't be for long, and that elections alone cannot solve the climate crisis. So let's talk about the context of climate change. In this section, I'll be talking about what's happened with the climate in the last 2 years. What are the implications for our future? What are the implications of climate change in Massachusetts? And what has been our progress in addressing climate change? The big problem is that we have radically changed the Earth's atmosphere. There are three major greenhouse gases. The one we talk about the most important one is carbon dioxide, but also methane and nitrous oxide are two important greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide levels have been under 300 parts per million for millennia. We broke that barrier, and in 1980 we reached 310. Now already we're at 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and as you could see, methane and nitrous oxide have gone up along with them. Climate scientists tell us that if we're going to keep the Earth from warming less than 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial times, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050, with a lot of that coming yesterday. They say that if that barrier of 2 degrees Celsius is particularly important, because as our climate gets warmer, we will have more and more problems. If we go beyond 2 degrees Celsius, then the problems may be too great for our civilization to handle. We started keeping track of temperature in around 1850. 14 of the hottest 15 years since then have been since the year 2000. Along with that has come an increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, droughts, floods, and wildfires. 2014 was the hottest year in human history until 2015. In 2015, the Earth crossed that 1 degree Celsius point as compared with pre-industrial time. So we're halfway to that terrible mark of 2 degrees Celsius increase. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration shows that nearly every month since 1980, we have been above the 20th century average for temperature. So what are the implications? What are the implications of global warming and climate change? I'm going to talk about some of the extreme weather events in 2015 and 2016. As you listen to these, keep two things in mind. One, extreme weather events are not proof of climate change, but what is proof is that we've been seeing a lot more of them, and they have become more intense. Also, when I get to the 2016 events, know that El Nino has been a big factor in those as well. So in 2015, we saw a heat wave in the Middle East where the temperatures in Iran felt like 160 degrees, 160. Pakistan had its most deadliest heat event ever. 2,000 people died. In India, 2,500 people died. Severe flooding in South America displaced over 150,000 people. In Yemen, they had a rare cyclone. It dumped more rain in that storm than typically occurs in Yemen in a year. Over 1 million people were badly impacted. The Philippines had another mega typhoon in 2015. It impacted more than 1 million people and dozens were killed. In Fiji, Cyclone Winston had winds of over 185 miles per hour, and it wiped out 10% of their GDP. Africa, they had the worst drought in a generation, and it put over 29 million people in food insecurity. Hurricane Patricia in our hemisphere had the highest wind speeds ever recorded in the northern hemisphere. The drought in Ethiopia caused more than 10 million people to need emergency food aid. In Vietnam, their drought cost them close to $7 billion. So we're getting a lot of these events, and as the Earth warms, we will get more and more of them. In 2016, this year, in January, Arctic temperatures averaged as much as 23 degrees above average. Picture if that happened here. February was the warmest above average month in recorded history. March was the hottest March we have ever had. The winter in the continental United States was the warmest on record, over 2 degrees Fahrenheit above the 20th century average. And in New England, no surprise to all of us, it was the warmest winter ever. So, let me talk now about the implications of climate change going forward. First, and perhaps most seriously, is sea level rise. Glaciers in Greenland, in Siberia, in Alaska, in Antarctica are melting, and scientists are now realizing that they're melting faster than we had previously believed. Professor Hansen, in his study with 18 other colleagues from around the world that recently came out, found that devastating sea level rise is likely to happen within decades, not within centuries. They are expecting a several meter sea level rise within 50 to 150 years. If they say that if there's no changes in our greenhouse gas trajectory, we will see sea level rise that will devastate all coastal cities. We live in a coastal city, so that should be particularly concerning to us. There's another problem with melting glaciers, and that is that it's putting a lot of fresh water into our saline ocean. And that fresh water threatens to slow or shut off the ocean currents that carry heat from the tropics around the world. Professor Hansen says now that limiting global temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius is probably not enough. And limiting that temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius is quite a daunting project as it is. Perhaps the next biggest problem that we are facing with climate change is water scarcity. NASA shows that our groundwater is being depleted from both climate change and from more demands on that groundwater. Groundwater is particularly important. With the drought in California, the 4-year drought in California that recently ended, we didn't feel it very much in terms of our food prices. That's because farmers were able to tap the groundwater and use that to water their crops. That groundwater only has several decades remaining in California, in the Midwest, and around the world. Already, 4 billion people on our planet experience severe water shortages at least 1 month a year. We have a hard time imagining that here in Boston. Drier regions are becoming more dry, both because of drought and because the sun, the warmer temperatures evaporate the soil more quickly. Less snow means less runoff, and many millions of people around the world depend upon runoff from glaciers for their water. We're also facing a bigger problem with wildfires. The wildfire season starts earlier and ends later. Wildfires are more intense than they had been and more numerous. Indeed, in 2015, we set another record for wildfires in the United States. More than 10 million acres burned. That's the size of Massachusetts and Connecticut combined. Kansas recently had its largest wildfire in history, and Alaska almost set a record as well. Storms are getting stronger. Hurricanes are not increasing in frequency, but they are increasing in power. And we're getting more big weather events defined as weather events with 2 inches of rain or more in a single storm. Climate scientists tell us that unless we sharply reduce our greenhouse gases, we will see superstorms stronger than any we have seen in modern times. Whoops. We are also, another major implication of climate change is, I'm getting ahead of myself. Oops, I'm missing a slide. Pretend that this one says the implications of climate change for ocean productivity. Ocean productivity is declining because warmer water is bleaching our coral reefs around the world and killing them off. Coral bleaching and coral reef decline is particularly important because they're the source of so many fish and of biodiversity. NOAA says that climate change is causing profound shifts in the Arctic ecosystem. The loss of sea ice and the warmer water temperatures are driving fish to the poles, and that is impacting wildlife and the indigenous populations that depend on them. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia is in decline from coral bleaching. Also, as we burn fossil fuels, the carbon dioxide that it emits is acidifying our oceans and is damaging crustaceans around the world. Climate change also has dire implications for terrorism, instability, economic damage, and disease. The World Economic Forum ranks the 29 greatest threats to mankind, and this past year they said that climate change is the #1 threat to mankind, both in terms of its likelihood and its impact. They said that climate change intensifies mass migration, water crises, food shortages, it constrains economic growth, and it increases security risks. The various Pentagon reports say the same thing. They say that climate change is a risk to our national security. It leads to mass migrations, to failed states, and those are conditions that foment terrorism. Indeed, in Syria, Their worst drought in history preceded their civil war and is said to be one of the causes. Tropical diseases are spreading away from the poles. Indeed, Lyme disease keeps creeping northwards, and it's expected that the Zika virus will do the same. What's happening in Massachusetts? What should we be most worried about? I believe we should be most worried about flooding, both from sea level rise and from intensifying storms. The northeast part of the United States is the part of the world that will see the greatest sea level rise because of our unique geography. And we have been seeing already a big increase in major precipitation events. NOAA says that climate change will lead to reduced stocks of cod, scallops, and mackerel. The lobster population is expected to crash in southern New England, but it will boom off the coast of Maine as the lobsters crawl northward to cooler waters. Our moose population is already in severe decline because warmer weather means more ticks that feed on the moose. Well, enough gloom and doom for a few slides. Let's talk about the good stuff. The world has made remarkable progress in addressing climate change over the last several years. Most prominently is the Paris Climate Accord. We've seen, in the Paris Climate Accord is the first time after decades of trying that the world has reached an accord on climate. Almost every country of the world is represented, and almost all of them have made set strong goals on climate change. It is not a treaty. The reason it's not a treaty is because President Obama knew he could not get a treaty past the Republican Congress. So these are goals, but still it is a very impressive achievement. Some feel that as countries strive to achieve these goals, they will create the momentum for a low-carbon economy that is unstoppable. So very positive. In 2015, President Obama announced the Clean Power Plan, which is going to sharply reduce greenhouse gases from American power plants. Now, that plan is tied up in the courts right now. It is likely that it will go through, particularly if Supreme Court Justice Scalia is replaced by somebody more moderate. The renewable energy is a big success story. The price of solar energy has plunged, and it continues to plunge, and the price of wind power has also gone down sharply. Last year, over about half of the electricity, the additional capacity for electricity in the world was produced by renewable energy. Batteries, 2015 was the year that battery storage became a reality for power plants. It's the first year that prices have come down enough that they make sense. Batteries are particularly important for bringing more renewable energy onto our electricity grid. They're also important for electric vehicles, and the price of electric vehicles are going down along with the battery price. Coal, perhaps the worst fossil fuel for greenhouse gas emissions, is on the decline worldwide, and indeed today, the largest private coal company, Peabody Energy, declared bankruptcy. Sharp decline in this country, and it's in decline around the world. The Keystone Pipeline, which was meant to bring the dirtiest oil in the world from Canada down to our Gulf Coast, was nixed by President Obama last year. And last year, Pope Francis turned heads around the world with his encyclical on climate change and his advocacy for climate action. He has done a great job of persuading people that we need to take action. President Obama has had, for the most part, an outstanding record on climate change. I mentioned the Paris Climate Accord, and more than anything, he was the person, more than anyone, he was the person responsible for bringing that about. In order to bring that about, he needed to create an accord with China to get both countries to agree to substantial cuts in greenhouse gas emissions, and he and the Chinese premier successfully did that. Almost as important in my mind is that the president has raised the profile of climate change so many more people around in this country and around the world understand that we need to take action. Early in his administration, the president put in his stimulus package $90 billion towards renewable energy and energy storage. That did a lot to propel those industries forward to the point they're at today. The president established very strong fuel standards for vehicles, for cars and trucks, and our mileage per gallon has increased and will continue to do so for the next decade. The president also has set much stronger efficiency standards for appliances and equipment. I mentioned the Clean Power Plan and the Keystone Pipeline. Recently, perhaps belatedly, the president established some strong methane regulations that will particularly reduce methane in fossil fuel developments. There are criticisms of the president also. And perhaps the major criticism is we've realized recently that if we're going to stop climate change, we have got to keep oil, natural gas, and coal in the ground, that we can't extract it all. But in the Obama administration, we've seen a big increase in gas and oil exploration, including on public land and including in the Arctic. Recently, the president has restricted much of that. Most of the Arctic is now off limits, as well as much of the Atlantic. The Gulf Coast is still open. So let's talk about the 2016 election and where climate change stands. Climate change has gotten some attention, has gotten a lot of attention amongst the Democratic candidates, and it's been a topic of discussion at the debates. It hasn't been much of a discussion at the Republican debates or in Republican circles. Regarding the voters, there's good and bad news. The good news is that the increase in the belief of science, of the science of climate change, has increased pretty rapidly over the last several years among all parties. Voters across America believe that we need to address climate change. They strongly support renewable energy and the president's climate power plan. The bad news: climate change and other environmental issues rank at or near the bottom of voters' lists of concerns, and that is, of course, noticed by candidates. Voters have prioritized much more highly issues like unemployment, healthcare, crime, abortion, and immigration. Surprisingly, at least to me, the Environmental Voter Project found that those people who prioritize the environment at the top have pretty poor voting records. People that care most about guns and abortion, they're much more likely to vote than people that are concerned about the environment. That needs to change. The fossil fuel industry has paid a lot of attention to this election. They have contributed $107 million so far to Republicans. Senator Cruz has reaped more than half of that. A little bit of fossil fuel money has also gone to Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders. And Senator Sanders has accused Secretary Clinton of taking money from fossil fuel bundlers. My take on that is that the dollar amount is low. It's not a terribly significant issue, albeit it bears watching. So, with everything going on with climate change, what do the candidates have to say? Here are a few treats from Mr. Trump. He said the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. He said that this very expensive global warming bullshit has got to stop. Our planet is freezing, record low temperatures, and our global warming scientists are stuck in ice. He said any and all weather events are used by global warming hoaxsters to justify higher taxes to save our planet. Mr. Trump opposes the carbon tax, the Clean Power Plan, and tax incentives for wind and solar. He wants to eliminate the Environmental Protection Agency. He says what they do is a disgrace. He is in favor of all kinds of fossil fuel drilling and removing all barriers to coal mining. What does Senator Cruz have to say? Climate change is the perfect pseudoscientific theory. It's not science, but religion. The observed temperature evidence does not support claims that carbon dioxide is dangerous. It doesn't matter that 97% of scientists agree about climate change because 97% of scientists thought that the Earth rotated around the sun in the 1600s. Apparently, Senator Cruz doesn't think that science has advanced very far since the 1600s. He says of the Climate Power Plan, this is the sort of power grab that our founders would have recognized as tyranny. Senator Cruz opposes the carbon tax and tax incentives for wind and solar. He supports elimination of the Department of Energy and many EPA programs. He supports increased fossil fuel exploration, the Keystone Pipeline, but he does support tax deductions for oil and gas companies. What does Governor Kasich believe? Governor Kasich's rhetoric on climate change is more moderate, but his positions are about the same as Mr. Trump and Senator Cruz. Governor Kasich says, I happen to believe there's a problem with climate change. I don't want to overreact to it. Do I think that human beings affect it? I do. How much? Not enough for me to go out and cost somebody their job. I just don't know enough about it. Well, maybe he'll learn something about it if he becomes president. Governor Kasich favors the same programs that Senator Cruz and Mr. Trump do: increase fossil fuel production, supporting fracking, Keystone Pipeline, drilling on federal lands, and offshore drilling. He opposes the president's Clean Power Plan. How about the Democratic candidates? The only candidate I couldn't get a juicy tweet or a juicy quote on was Senator Clinton. But she did say, climate change is real. It's hurting our planet and our people. We can't afford a president who ignores the science. Senator Clinton wants to greatly expand our progress with renewable energy. She wants to see a third of our electricity come from renewables by 2027. She wants to modernize our electricity grid to accommodate more renewables. She wants to expand renewables on federal land. She favors cap and trade, but not the carbon tax. She has changed her position in the last year, some of her positions in the last year, to be more favorable on climate. She is now against Arctic drilling and against the Keystone Pipeline, two areas that she previously supported. One of the main criticisms of Secretary Clinton is that when she was Secretary of the State, she did not use her megaphone to raise the issue of climate change as her successor, Senator Kerry, has. Also, she has past ties to the fossil fuel industry. There's no shortage of good tweets from Senator Sanders. Climate change is real and caused by human activity. Our job is to aggressively transform our energy system away from fossil fuels. Climate change is the biggest national security threat facing the United States. If we're serious about combating climate change, we need to put an end to fracking. Senator Sanders calls for 100% renewables by 2050, a ban on fossil fuel production on public land, a nationwide ban on fracking. He supports a climate tax. He opposes Keystone, and he wants to create a federal clean energy workforce of 10 million people. So there's a clear line between the Republicans and the Democrats. But a good question is, will Senator Sanders be more effective on climate change than Secretary Clinton? Certainly his positions are stronger, and he's been more consistent throughout the year. But there are more things than that to being effective. Being effective on climate change also calls for political skills, and it calls for bringing more Democrats along with them to Congress in this election. Most environmental groups are neutral in this election. Clearly, Greenpeace favors Senator Sanders. Climate change really, really should not be a partisan issue. We should talk about differences in how to solve climate change, not about whether it exists. Everybody cares about the future. The Republican Party is the only major political party in the developed world that does not believe in the science of climate change. I believe it's impossible to solve the climate crisis without them. They are going to control the House of Representatives for the coming years, most likely. And our crisis is so great, our challenge so daunting, that I believe we all need to row in the same direction. And as long as we have a major political party saying climate change is a hoax, it's going to be hard to persuade the American people to take action. Most Republican officials right now oppose action on climate change. Why is this? Well, one major reason is that fossil fuel companies are the preponderant funders of their campaign. A second reason is that Republicans in this country right now do not favor government solutions. I would say to that, there are also many free market solutions to climate change, and we should begin talking about them. And also, very importantly, there are a lot of hardcore activists that are particularly prominent, if not dominant, in primaries that every Republican senator and congressman has to face, that deny the reality of climate change. And so it's hard to face down those people and win elections. However, the crack in the Republican wall is beginning. Right now, in a recent major survey, 59% of Republicans believe that climate change is real. And half of them would support candidates who favor renewables over coal. And there are some major constituencies, major Republican constituencies, that want to see action on climate. Those include national defense conservatives, such as former Secretary of State George Shultz, who believe, like the Pentagon, like the World Economic Forum, that climate change is a threat multiplier and a threat to our security. Major corporations, not fossil fuel companies, but other major corporations, from Goldman Sachs to Walmart, are actually changing their business plans to account for the reality of climate change. They would like to see climate action too. Amongst evangelicals, there is a small but growing movement that we need to address climate change to save creation. And this concern is more prominent amongst young evangelicals. There are some congressmen that now support, Republican congressmen that now support action on climate change. In 2015, 11 members of the House signed a strong resolution on climate change. Now that's 11 out of about 250. There are 4 senators out of about 56 Republican senators that created a climate policy group this past year. In 2015, Congress, which needed Republican support, passed a resolution extending the tax credit for solar and wind. I don't know how much to tout that, because the oil companies won a major concession in the horse trading that passed that law. The oil companies were allowed now to sell American oil overseas. But still, it's surprising to see that. So perhaps we will see growing Republican support in the coming years. I believe it's essential. I believe that this election coming up is absolutely critical for us to make progress on climate change. I believe that it's essential that we elect Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton, or Senator Sanders. However, I believe that that alone is not enough. Let me give an illustration. A friend of mine had a 2005 Subaru Outback. It got 22 miles per gallon. It broke down this past year, and she bought a 2016 Subaru Outback. That got 28 miles per gallon. So as a result of government policy, largely, her new Subaru Outback got 25% better mileage. But she could have opted for a Prius wagon that was about as big, cost about the same, and would have gotten over 40 miles per gallon. Government policy only got us so far. We need the participation of citizens, businesses, and the nonprofit sector to be more active on climate change. To achieve our 80% goal, our 80% greenhouse gas reduction goal, we need collectively to change our culture and to change our behaviors. We're winning. We've got to win faster, but we're winning. With that, I'd like to see what you think.